You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. So based on your understanding, these advanced beings, whether they're extraterrestrials or humanoids from other planets or maybe interdimensional realms, came here and they did indeed use hominid DNA combined with possibly their own to create what is now seen as humanity.
Absolutely. The Atrahasis explains that in detail, how there was a worker class of Anunnaki. They were called the Igigi, and
I've heard it pronounced a Gigi or a Gigi.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like the Atrahasis. It can be pronounced different ways. So they basically were the worker class of the Anunnaki, and they rebelled against Yahweh and Lil because they were getting tired of doing all this doing all this work. Their race was used to using technology to do the hard labor. They came from a more highly technological society, and where they had, probably robots and AI and all these different systems that did their work for them. But they were on a planet now where they had to use what was here, and they got stuck digging the canals, mining the gold, building the city-states, the early, buildings and such. And so they were the ones doing all the hard labor. They were raising the animals, they were raising the crops, and they rebelled against this work because they weren't used to doing this. They were like soldiers, basically. They were like meant to, they came with Enlil, and Lil was the commander of Earth, also known as the god of the air. And he's also known as Ahura Mazda in the Zoroastrian, but they rebelled, and so he went to his brother Enki, who was more of a scientist, and he said, "Fashion a man, fashion a Lulu, to replace, to take over the work of the gods, the Igigi." And so then the Atrahasis goes into detail how Enki, with the help of his half-sister Ninmah, in fact, just a side note, Ninmah, we actually get the name Mama, like your mother, from Ninmah. And I can explain that later why that is. But she's also called Ninhursag. Well, Ninmah and Enki, they went and fashioned the first Adamu, who was called Adapa. And they explained that this was to be a prototype that would replace the Anunnaki, the Igigi, from having to do the labors. And then if you have ever read the cuneiform tablet, Enki and Ninmah, it's very interesting. They're like literally sitting together in a it's almost like a laboratory setting. They're drinking beer together, kind of messing with each other, joking around. And then they start working on fashioning this Adamu. And they're going through all these different variations, like
making a few mistakes here and there.
What are we going to do with this one? Yeah, it's kind of creepy when you read it, because you're like, what in the heck am I reading? Because they're kind of joking around about these like these weird creations they made that are missing limbs, and that they, all these oddities, and it's because they're going through that process of, working out the kinks on this hybrid, on this fashioned being. And that was what was being explained through that, was how they had to work through all that, just like our genetic scientists have to do the same thing. You have to keep tinkering with it until you get it just right.
So do you think what has been termed the Elohim may have also been the Anunnaki?
Absolutely. The Elohim has been misused by, I'm not even going to say it's misused in the Bible the way it's translated, because the Bible actually translates it correctly. It's the churches and the religious orders that have taken it out of context. What they've tried, so Elohim, El is singular God, Elohim is multiple gods. In fact, it can mean the shining ones, the powerful ones. There's different inflections of Elohim. And it even says in Genesis, I'm paraphrasing it loosely, but it essentially says come, let us make man in our image after our likeness. I mean, it tells you right there in the Bible. And then the biblical scholars will try to say, well, that was the Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And that's why Elohim was plural. But that's ridiculous, because once you read the cuneiform, you realize that those stories, that biblical narrative was taken from the cuneiform stories.
Depending on what researcher you're speaking with, there have been different versions of humanity and possibly different cataclysmic events and resets that could have wiped us completely off the face of the earth, and we may have had to start over multiple times throughout our ancient past. If that is the case, could it be possible that there had been versions of humanity before what we understand as the Anunnaki creation story? And is what you understand of Atlantis, does this come before or after the Babylonian creation story?
Thanks, Chris. Wow, you read my mind. I did want to segue into that. So,
Good.
Wow, you set me up perfect. So, you know how you were mentioning earlier, these extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or perhaps is it that they were the Atlanteans? That is actually factored into my theory on this, because it makes sense. It could be, it would be very hard for an extraterrestrial race to come here, even with super advanced technology.
Right.
And of course, the biblical narrative is that they're interdimensional, that they're fallen angels, even though in the Bible, it never really totally explains what that means. It just gives you a loose sense of, well, they come from heaven. Well, what is heaven? Is it space? Is it another dimension? However, what you're saying is it actually can fit very well into this puzzle piece, because if the Atlantis at one time was a super technologically advanced civilization that was on Earth, now, just like now, we in the United States, Europe, and Asia, and a lot of other, areas of the Earth, countries on Earth are technologically advanced. However, there are lesser advanced nations on Earth, lesser advanced peoples on Earth. There are literally people still living in jungles, like living off the land, very primitive. Like, I mean, they think a phone is like a device of the gods, So during the time of Atlantis, if you have read the Edgar Cayce readings on that, and of course Dolores Cannon has also done a lot of work on Atlantis, when she was still here with us, and of course you had Plato and what he said about Atlantis, and then he got that from the Egyptians, was passed down, and then if you've read the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Now, I don't want to go into the yay or nay on that, because some people say, well, Dorian made it all up. It doesn't matter, because if Dorian wrote that, he actually pulled from the mystery school teachings that would have been passed down for thousands of years. So whether that was from Thoth, Hermes, or Dorian wrote those, it doesn't matter. That wisdom has been passed down for thousands of years. So according to the Emerald Tablets, Thoth was an Atlantean priest. And when Atlantis was destroyed, what happened is that the ruling class, the priest class, and probably their scientific class escaped that destruction. And then after the things had settled down, they went around the earth to start reestablishing civilization again once it had been destroyed completely worldwide. And this makes a lot of sense, because even in the Emerald Tablets, it talks about how Egypt, of course, that was the land of Chem, pre-Egypt time. He talks about how they had a civilization, but they got destroyed, and they went back to primitive living again, and they were like wild barbarians again. And then when Thoth and his entourage showed up,